So, an important skill that you need to learn, whether you're an adult, whether you're a child. In fact, it was so important they placed it on the national curriculum for primary schools, which is to be able to basically classify living things, to put them into some sort of order, to be able to tell the differences between them, to be able to identify them by characteristics. And we call that taxonomy. And the two simplest skills that you need to be able to learn is how to ask a question and get an answer to it. And the important thing with asking that question is that you ask a question in the right way. And that being that it can only have a yes or a no. That is called a dichotomous answer. It's either yes or no, true or false. Di meaning two. It's either one or the other. So you have to be able to ask really positive questions. And that's a skill that everybody needs to learn, especially if they want to identify anything. And what we're going to be identifying is things that are in the plant world. And again, in primary schools, they're saying that we need to be able to identify common wild plants. And what we're going to be looking at today is evergreen and deciduous trees and shrubs. And we've come into this park over here because it has such a range of trees and shrubs that are growing here. Let's ask the next question for another plant. Well, next set of questions. Are you made out of wood? Yes. Have you got a rough or a hard bark on the outside? Yes. Have you got lots of branches that come from the floor? Yes. This is classified as a shrub. But beware, the type of classification that we're looking at here might not fit everything. So for example, what we're looking at the moment is a holly tree. Now holly trees, sometimes they will just produce one trunk and they can be categorized as a tree. But in general terms, they tend to get used more as a shrub, which is a bush that grows low to the ground that has multi-stems from the ground. Whereas a tree has one big trunk that goes, or one big stem that goes from the ground and then branches out the top. But both are made out of wood. Both, when you cut into them, you can count the annual rings and see how old they are because they are woody plants. So we start to look at a little bit closer, we look at more characteristics. We've looked, it's got a trunk, it's made out of wood, it's got bark, it produces branches at the top of the trunk, it's a tree. But now we start to look at the branches. Here we are in January, in winter time, and we'll notice that it is just twigs. It is dormant. That means that it's deciduous and it drops its leaves in the autumn, and then the new leaves come out in the spring. This plant here we can see, because there are no leaves on it, we class it as deciduous. So this question you ask only at certain times of the year. So if you ask the question, has it got any leaves? If you ask that question in the summer, you're still not going to be able to fully know whether it's deciduous. But if you ask that question in the winter, if it is no, then it is deciduous. If it is yes, then it is evergreen. Sylvatica, that's the botanical Latin name. We also know this tree as a beech tree. So Fagus sylvatica is the Latin name that is used all over the world, but in this country we call it the beech tree. And what we're always looking at with characteristics on plants is the most difficult time of year to identify a plant very often is in the winter, because at the moment everybody looks at that and they can't see the wood for the trees because they just think it's a bunch of sticks. And it's not until you become more acquainted with the tree and you learn its characteristics that you'll be able to tell. It has a long, sharp bud. It could prick you, that bud could. Yeah, so it's a brown, rusty colour. And also when you look at how the buds are arranged on the branch, they are arranged in a way that is alternate. They're not opposite each other like your ears are opposite on your face, but they are alternate. The bark tends to be quite silvery, has a sheen to it. And when you look down on the ground, you might be able to find some of the leaves and some of the fruit. Obviously, if it's not attached, you cannot positively identify the plant. But we can see that the leaf there is brown, so it's obviously deciduous, it's fallen off. And we can see that it's rounded, it hasn't got a serrated edge, it's smooth edged, and it's got like a fish bone sort of arrangement of veins on the leaf. So that's the leaf, and then the fruit is this rough nut that has a rough outside. And if you put all of those three things together, the fact that it's a tree, the fact that it's deciduous, the fact that it has alternate buds, that they are long and sharp and brown, that the fruit is rough and is like a nut, and the leaf is a rounded oval shape, and it has no serrated edge to it, so it hasn't got teeth, it's got opposite veins, we can positively say those are all questions that have a yes or no. So it's been yes, 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 yes. They're the dichotomous answers. We know that this is the beech tree. And that's what we're going to apply now to every single plant that we're going to look at for this. But you'll need to know whether it's for your qualification or whether it's for part of the national curriculum that you're studying at the moment. So, back to holly again. So the important thing that we're looking at, if you really want to positively identify it, is making sure that what we're picking up, it is definitely that. So like the holly here, it looks like it's deciduous, but it isn't. What's happened is something from the beech tree dropped onto the holly tree. So make sure, before you identify it, it's attached to the same plant. Plant identification is really important. We've become detached ourselves from plant identification as people. People used to get medicine and food out of these things, and you need to know your stuff, because if you got the wrong plant, it could be poisonous and you could die. So what we're learning was the difference between life and death. So with the holly that we have here, we have this leaf, which is glossy green. Yep, it has prickles and spikes on it, but that doesn't positively identify, because as you go further up the tree, you'll notice that the prickles and spikes, they disappear, they go smooth, because it's put that energy and effort into producing those spikes. If an animal's not going to eat it that high up, unless there's a giraffe here, why would it need to put on those spikes? But you'll notice how shiny the leaf is, how glossy it is. It's called Ilex aquifolium because aqua, meaning water, it looks like a shiny surface of the water. And the reason why it's shiny is that evergreens want to conserve moisture. They don't want to lose water over winter, because it will be locked up as ice in the northern hemisphere. So they produce this waxy surface that prevents water from escaping from the surface of the leaf. Again, we've got green stems, and again, look at how the leaves are identified, arranged on the stem. They're alternate, they're not opposite each other. We know that the bark is again there, it's quite smooth on the holly tree, but that could be a juvenile thing. Don't just think the bark can be quite a distractor. For example, some trees, when they're young, have very smooth bark, and when they grow much older, like oak trees, the bark becomes much rougher. But when you cut into holly, the wood is very white. But all of the questions that we want to ask about this is, what time of year it is? Well, it's December, we know that, or it's winter, or it's January, or it's February. If you're asking that question in the winter time, and it's green and there's leaves on it, we know it's evergreen. We've asked the right question, we've got a definite yes. Has it got prickles on the leaf? Yes. Are the leaves arranged alternatively? Yes. Are the leaves shiny and green? Yes. We know it's holly, it's Ilex aquifolium, another native plant, a plant that is indigenous, that comes from the United Kingdom. So don't forget, deciduous doesn't just mean that the leaves actually physically fall off. Plants, when they're younger, in their juvenile, childlike state, often hold on to their leaves. Look at this beech tree here. We've just seen over there, the beech tree's lost all its leaves. But we still know it's deciduous because the leaves have turned brown. These will be pushed off in the spring when these new long sharp buds open out, unfurl, and push off the old leaves from last year. And the thing about this, they say, is that because the foliage is sort of young and it means that there's not going to be a massive weight of leaves on there. It's there as kind of protection for that long foliage. And also, if you've got a beech and you trimmed it into a hedge and you kept trimming it each year, it would keep the leaves through the winter like this in this brown state and then push them off in the spring. But it's still classed as deciduous. But another plant that I want to come on to is in the conifer or pine family. So it's a very different type of plant. It's a plant that doesn't flower like the others. They produce pine cones, and also the foliage has lots of needles on it. So we can see there. So like the holly tree, it needs to conserve moisture. So the holly tree, Ilex aquifolium, had shiny foliage that was waxy. Whereas we can see on this one here, the Scots pine, it has these needles. And the needles are a little bit like they're in twos like a hairpin. So on Scots pine, they're always in a pair like that. See how they're joined together? A slight twist in them. Again, it's waxy, so it doesn't lose moisture through a waxy surface, but also it's got a very low surface area. It's a bit like if I got this coat and got it soaking wet, I've got more chance of getting it dry if I hang it out on the washing line than if I scrunched it up really, really small. And what you start to see is that the Scots pine really stands out with the bark. It's this kind of red colour. It's got these weird scales that are on it. And what's great is to learn these trees where you compare it to other trees. So we've got the beech tree over there, we've got the holly tree there. We can see clear differences between them. And that's another way of identifying it, is knowing the difference. If you're really good at the game, spot the difference, you'll be really great at being able to identify plants. So, has it got needles? Yes. Are the needles evergreen? Yes. Has it got red, scaly bark? Yes. Does it produce pine cones? So there's the pine cone there. Does it produce fruit like that? Remember we saw the beech nut over there, or we might have seen a red berry on the holly. We've got the pine cone here. Yes. All of those dichotomous answers meaning yes altogether means that we have a Scots pine, or Pinus sylvestre, which is the Latin or scientific name for it. So another tree, which is a classic British tree, is Quercus robur, or the common oak tree. And here we've got quite a few that are growing up here. You can see, again, it's starting to get that quite rough bark on the sort of older tree here, but a younger one, again, it's smooth. So until it gets much older and much wider, if the bark is quite rough, it's got these lines in it, we know it's an oak tree. But what you've got to do is look at things like the foliage again. This is what we're looking at. Whoops, we shouldn't really do that, shouldn't break off branches in the park. That one I think is dead anyway. But so what we start to see again is it's got quite rounded fat buds. Again, remember we compare it to the Fagus sylvatica, or the beech tree. They were long and sharp and brown. This one's quite swelled up, quite fat, and very often there's like two on the end of each branch. So we can see one that's living here. And the great thing about this one is it's still attached is a leaf. And again, we've got the oak leaf here, which is a classic. It's got lobes in it, a bit like the lobes on your ear. See how you've got that curve bit there? It's got lobes in the leaf, very symmetrical, sort of wavy outside edge, whereas if you remember the beech, it had a nice smooth edge, wasn't serrated. And we can see that the buds on this one here, again, are alternate, so they're not opposite each other. And it's quite, the twigs have lots of joins in them. Oak trees, very often as a defence mechanism, especially when it gets dry and are struggling for water, they drop foliage so that they can conserve moisture. So these twigs easily break off. So that's how the oak tree is, and it's a common oak tree. And as they get older, we can see that this bark starts to get much more rough. You get these sort of little lines. And of course, if you can find it, the other thing that would really help you to help identify it, but I think the squirrels have had them all, is finding acorns, which is the fruit. Now, if you can identify the flower or the fruit, you can positively identify the plant. That's the key. So if you can get the fruit or the flower, there's no doubt. Okay, but what we're working on here is the dichotomous answers. Is it wood? Yes. Is it got bark? Yes. Is the bark quite rough on older plants? Yes. Has it got a trunk? Yes, it's a tree. So we've established that. The branches, do they look like they've got lots of joins, etc. in them? Yes. Are the buds quite round and fat? There might be 2 or 3 on the end of each branch. Yes. So is the leaves, can you see them nearby? Have they got lobes like your ear? Have they got curved edges, wavy edges to them? Can you find an acorn nearby? Is an acorn growing on it? Yes. All of those questions answered yes, you can positively identify as Quercus robur, the oak. So when you're in the woods, it's looking at, remember we said it was spot the difference? Yeah, so we've just looked at the common oak. And another tree, can you spot the difference? Very different to the oak tree, very different to the holly, very different to the beech tree, is the silver birch. This one's called Betula pendula, and the big thing that sticks out about it, that really helps you positively identify it, particularly when it's over 5 years old, is the white bark. And you can see that the bark peels off, because in the northern hemisphere that's what we used to make paper out of. So you can see there, we're associating the use with its identity as a characteristic. That's always important. If you can do that, you can associate the use of a tree, like for example an apple tree. If you learn how to identify it based on its use, you will remember it better because you've got a relationship It's always better to, or easier to remember someone's name if you've got a relationship with them, if you're friends with them, doesn't it? You won't forget their name so easily. And that's the same thing with plants. If you've got a relationship with the plant, you'll remember it. So the silver birch, again, it's a tree. Are there any leaves on it? Well, we know that at the moment, we're in the winter. There are no leaves on it, it's deciduous. And so we know that this is the silver birch. And so we're asking all the right questions. And as we go a bit further in, we can start to look at what the foliage is like. And you can see that here, the foliage is very, well, it gets used as a broom. Can you see that would be like a witch's broom? That's there like that. And again, we've got quite different types of buds, etc. that are on there. Again, the buds are alternate. Yes, the buds are quite small, narrow, a little bit pointy, not as pointy as a beech tree, so we're able to identify it. And again, winter's always a challenging time of the year. And also the fruit, I can't see any on any of the silver birch around here, but the fruit is a catkin. And again, if you find that catkin and all of those things in place, such as the white bark, this long sort of, it's called Betula pendula because it's like a pendula. It swings, it droops down like that. If you're looking for those types of branches that are there, if it's deciduous, that means it drops its leaves in the winter. If you've got the bark that peels off like paper and it's bright white, you know you've got silver birch, Betula pendula, and that's a deciduous tree. So there's the oak tree that's there, and we're moving then. We've got a Scots pine that's there. Can you see the needles that are up there? And we've got the pine cones. And so what we're starting to do is to look at these plants next door to each other. That's the great thing about coming into a park or a garden, is rather than looking it up in a book, when you see them next to each other, you can really tell the differences that are there between them. And this one here is gorse. Now, gorse is a really interesting plant. We've already done a video on this as well, and we'll put it together. So I'm not going to go into so much detail. Royal record plant, the smallest leaves on an evergreen shrub. And it's called a shrub because we asked the question, has it got a main trunk? No. Has it got lots of branches, woody branches, that are coming from the ground? Yes, it is a shrub or like a bush. And so what we start to see is that these spikes here are the leaves. That's where they produce the food. And then on the end, we've got these flowers. Now it's just finished flowering. Gorse flowers all the time. So can you see how significant the flower? The flower is yellow very often, but you can see it's starting to turn into a pea pod. It's actually in the pea family, the Legumiaceae family. So again, we've got some fruit. I dropped it. We've got some fruit that we can look at, we can inspect it, and we now know that's a really positive way of identifying it, because the fruit is the way that plants, generally speaking, are classified or grouped together, and how they decide that they're related. And basically, the peas in a pod are that it's got a pod, and when you open up the pod, it has got lots of seeds in it that are arranged like they would be in a pea pod. Now, when the seeds are ripe, when the temperature's right, they explode, and that's how gorse spreads. It goes on. So again, it hasn't got broad leaves. It's got very, very narrow leaves that act as thorns as well. Same sort of characteristics as the holly and as the Scots pine. But again, if you grab hold of them, they are sharp, so it doesn't want you to eat it. But also, it's very efficient because it's using those spines and spikes to photosynthesize and produce food. So here we have the silver birch, a much better example. With the branches, we've got catkins that are coming out, and that's great. This time of year, we found the fruit. We can identify it positively as silver birch because you can see that catkin there, that long sort of flower that it has on it that turns into fruit, that drops lots and lots of tiny seeds. You can see it's opening out on the silver birch at the moment. And again, it's got these fine branches that come down and they swing and they're pendulous, which is why it's called Betula pendula. So here we have the definition of a tree. Beautiful here. It's a tree that's unfortunately been cut down. It's dead. It's covered in mushrooms. But if we have a look a little bit closer, we can see it's got bark. That makes it a tree. And we can see it's got annual rings. Each one of those rings tells us how old it is. It's hard, so we know it's woody. So therefore that defines it as a tree or woody material. Now remember, if it's got one big trunk, it's a tree. That's one stem, single stem that goes all the way up. Or if it's got multi-stems, but it's still woody that come from the ground like a bush, that defines it as a shrub. So this tree is called the sycamore tree or Acer pseudoplatanus. We can see that the bark on it's quite smooth. As it gets older, it does get a bit flaky, like that. It's got this lovely smooth bark. And we can see that the branches here they've got a nice big, what we call scaly bud. So if you come in a little bit closer and have a look, why don't you come and have a look at the buds? So you can see that they're nice and green and they're scaly, asking all the right questions. It's the winter, so there's no leaves on there. It's got these nice big thick green buds, and you can see what happens the way it grows is I've been going on about how they're arranged, and you can notice on here that they are arranged opposite each other like your ears, so it stands out from the other plants. So if we look a little bit more closely, you will see that the buds come out opposite each other. Green and scaly come out opposite each other. Now the leaves are digitate, they're fingers, so it's like the Canadian flag. I can see a few that are down here. That are here. Obviously that's the oak tree, we know it's not that one. But you can see it's got fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But obviously it's not attached, so we can't be completely 100% positive about it. So that's the sycamore tree, Ace pseudoplatanus. It's pseudo-platanus because people thought it looked like the London plane. It isn't the London plane. It looks like the London plane. That's why it got called Acer pseudo, like a pseudonym, pseudo-platanus. And again, the one thing that it does have is the helicopter fruit that comes down. When you throw it up in the air, it spins and comes down, and that's what really positively identifies it. So we still can't see the wood for the trees. Still can't get order out of chaos. You see a bunch of branches and all sorts of things that are put together here. What you've got to start to do is to break it down and remember those investigative skills of where we're looking at what each plant is. Now, this is material that had fallen on the ground. I hadn't broken it off branches or trees that were in the park. Some of it had already broken off, or it was from my own garden. Always ask for permission if you're going to take something from somebody else's plants. And if you go into a public area, do not obviously just rip branches off plants that are already growing there. Okay, so all we're doing is the order of chaos is a comparison. It's a game of spot the difference. And so what we're trying to do is to put things together so that we can see them in their individual characteristics. So the first thing we do, remember, we are still within the winter time. And so the first thing we do is to say, well, we've got the evergreens and we know that they're here. We've got this one and we've got this one. And we've got this one over here. So these ones are the easiest that we can start to sort out and identify in a positive way. So first things first that we're going to look at is we'll notice that great thing about identifying this one is the Scots pine, because A, it has the fruit, which is, well, it's a pine cone that's on there. B, it's got the needles, and you remember what I said about the Scots pine needles is that they are attached together like a hairpin. There's two of them together, and as you can see there, there's a slight twist in them, so you can see it's joined that one end. So that's a Scots pine, like that waxy foliage, and then we've got the next one here, which is a holly. So we can see that it's got spines, it's got very glossy leaves. The top side is dark, the bottom side is a light green. And what's great about this one is you can see it's got flowers on. Now what would have been really great is we had red berries. That would have really have been able to help you to identify it as a Ilex aquifolium or holly. The next one that we have is Guinness World Records, smallest leaves, which are the leaves are the spines. And the great thing about this one is we've got one that's actually physically in flower. So we can really positively identify it as gorse. And you can see the seeds that are starting to form there, the leguminaceae seeds that are forming. Got a little bit of the bark from the Scots pine. Remember how it's peeling? So there's another way. So again, another positive. Yes, it's got scaly bark, slightly red in colour. It's got the cone, it's got the needles. So it's more things to say that's definitely a Scots pine. But obviously some of the more difficult ones. So like this one here is very easy because we know it's a silver birch. I haven't brought the white bark with me, but it's got the fruit. And you can see there on the fruit that it's the catkins. It's these thin, small buds, thin branches. That makes it the Betula pendula. So it's thin because it's pendulous. it weeps and blows in the breeze like a pendulum on a clock. So that's silver birch. And then what we've got over here that's coming up is the beech. So remember what we said about the beech tree. It's got that long spiky bud, but this one's the juvenile child foliage, young foliage, which still has the leaves on. And again, those leaves are the smooth edged, hasn't got a serrated edge or lobed edge like the oak tree, and it's got those veins that are opposite like a fish bone or a fish body. There's a better idea of the leaf that we've got there. And of course, what would make it even better is if we, if you can find a nut, a beech nut, that goes with it. And to sum up as well, the next one that we have is the oak tree. So the oak tree here, you can see that the buds are very round and swollen. Sometimes you get 2 or 3 on the end. They are alternate. And again, it's got that sort of twig section where they could easily break off, sort of little sections of twig that it has. Again, if you can get yourself hands on something like an acorn, so there's an acorn there, that's another way of positively identifying it, that big swollen nut there, the acorn, which we all know probably so well. Acorn meaning to make meat, corn meaning making meat, because they used to feed it to pigs to make them nice and fat, so that's why they called it meat. And then another tree that we came across was the sycamore, and you can see on that one the buds really stand out because they are opposite each other. So we can see that the buds are opposite, like a pair of ears. And also I managed to find some fruit which is winged or like a helicopter, and so that really makes it stand out. And if you manage to get the leaves that are like a hand, looks like the Canadian flag, you've got lots and lots of yeses. And that's the key to all of this. It's finding all of those different yeses. Yeah. So, and it's basically, it can only be yes or no. It can only be true or false. And so there's a good number of native trees, both evergreen and deciduous, as well as shrubs, that you've learned the key elements of being able to identify them. So why don't you go out and have a go at seeing if you can be a detective and work out all the names of these different plants.